The ballroom glowed with soft golden lights as Jason and Emily walked through the grand entrance of their college alumni reunion. 12 years of marriage had settled into them like an old comfortable sweater, and Jason felt that familiar sense of ease as he squeezed Emily's hand. She smiled back, but something in her eyes felt distant already, nervous. The banners hanging from the ceiling read Class of 2012, and suddenly Jason was transported back to their freshman year when they had met at a chemistry study group and instantly clicked. Emily wore a blue dress that brought out her eyes, and her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but Jason noticed she kept checking her reflection in the glass of the windows as they moved through the crowd. Around them, classmates were embracing and laughing loudly, sharing stories of promotions and travels and exciting new chapters in their lives. People kept approaching them with warm greetings, and Jason found himself sliding back into old friendships easily, but Emily seemed to shrink inward with each passing hour. Sighs. As the evening progressed, they sat at a round table with 3 other couples, and the conversation turned to life accomplishments and journeys taken. Marcus, who had been their roommate junior year, talked about his startup in California and how he had spent 2 years backpacking through Southeast Asia before settling into business. His wife nodded enthusiastically as he spoke. Another classmate named David mentioned his recent promotion to vice president and his upcoming sabbatical to France. Jason noticed Emily listening intently to every story with an expression he could not quite name. Her jaw tightened slightly and her fingers twisted the stem of her wine glass slowly, voice trembling. When someone asked her about her job, she mentioned briefly that she worked in marketing for a mid-sized firm but quickly redirected the conversation to Jason. He had done well for himself, becoming a project manager at a solid company, and he shared his accomplishments easily. But Emily did not add to his story the way she usually did. She simply stared at her plate. When the dinner service ended and people began mingling near the bar, Emily excused herself to the restroom. Pauses for 15 minutes. When she returned, her eyes looked slightly red and she sat quietly beside Jason as he chatted with old friends. He placed his hand on her knee under the table, but she did not respond with her usual warmth. Instead, she gazed across the ballroom at a group of women laughing and dancing near the stage. One of them was Sarah, their former roommate, who had become a documentary filmmaker and traveled constantly. Later, as the night deepened and the crowd thinned out, Jason found Emily alone on the terrace looking out at the city lights below. He approached her carefully, nervous, and asked if she was okay. She turned to him, and in that moment he saw something vulnerable and aching in her expression. She had been drinking more than usual, and her words came out slower, more deliberate. Voice trembling. "Jason, I need to tell you something," she began, and her voice wavered like a fragile thread. "Something has been sitting in my chest for a long time, and seeing everyone tonight just brought it all back. I don't regret us, but I regret the version of myself that never got to exist. I was 22 when we got married. I had all these dreams and plans, and somehow they just disappeared into our life together." Jason felt his stomach tighten. He wanted to respond, but he found himself frozen, listening as Emily spoke about the person she might have become if she had not settled down so young. She talked about how she wondered what adventures she might have had, what career heights she could have reached, what she might have learned about herself in solitude and independence. Her tears fell quietly, crying, and Jason realized that her regret was not about him alone but about a fundamental loss she had experienced. What the reader learns: sometimes the people we love most carry silent sorrows we never knew existed. Jason learns that comfort can mask unfulfilled dreams and that true love requires the courage to hear difficult truths without becoming defensive. Emily teaches us that young love, while beautiful, can sometimes mean sacrificing crucial years of self-discovery, and that suppressing these truths only creates emotional distance that grows deeper with time. Their mistake was believing that passion would remain constant without intentional effort and honest communication about individual needs alongside couple goals. Jason stood frozen on the terrace as Emily's words hung in the cool night air between them like smoke that would not dissipate. His mind raced in 1,000 directions at once, and he felt his chest tighten with an emotion he could not immediately name, gasping. Was it anger? Was it hurt? Was it guilt? All three seemed to crash into him simultaneously, and he struggled to find words that felt adequate for this moment. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he had never asked her to sacrifice anything, but the honesty in her eyes told him that his defense would be both pointless and cruel. Pauses. "You never told me, Emily," he finally said, his voice coming out quieter than he intended. "In 12 years of marriage, you never once said any of this to me. How could I have known if you kept it all locked away inside?" He realized immediately that his words sounded accusatory, and he watched her flinch, voice trembling. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked away from him. "I know," she whispered, quietly. "I know you didn't know because I didn't know how to say it without hurting you, without making you feel like you weren't enough. And you were always enough, Jason. That was never the issue. The issue was me and what I wanted from myself before we became an us." He moved closer and reached for her hand, but she hesitated before accepting it. They stood together in silence for several minutes, and Jason felt something fundamental shift inside him. He began replaying their entire relationship through a new lens. He remembered Emily at 25 when she talked about wanting to write a novel. He remembered her mentioning at 32 that she wished she had studied abroad. He remembered countless moments when she grew quiet and distant after conversations about other people's adventures. The realization hit him hard and without warning, shouting internally. All this time she had been mourning while he had been celebrating. While he felt proud of the life they built together, she had been grieving the life she never lived. He had been so focused on their shared dreams that he never noticed she had abandoned her individual ones. The guilt was suffocating, voice trembling, and tears filled his eyes. "I want to fix this," he said desperately, but Emily shook her head gently. "You can't fix it by just promising things will change, Jason. The damage was done years ago when we both pretended it didn't matter. When we both convinced ourselves that love was enough." She paused and her voice cracked, crying, when she continued. "I never stopped loving you, but somewhere along the way I stopped loving myself." They returned to the reunion, but neither of them was fully present. Jason went through the motions of conversation and laughter, laughing hollowly, but his mind remained shattered. He watched Emily reconnect with Sarah, the documentary filmmaker, and he noticed how alive she seemed in that moment, how animated and engaged. It was like watching a different version of his wife emerge, and he realized with painful clarity that he had never truly seen her fully in years. As they drove home in silence that night, Jason kept replaying everything. He thought about the days when Emily used to write poetry and he had encouraged it, then gradually stopped asking about it. He remembered the time she mentioned wanting to take painting classes, and he had expressed concerns about the expense. Small decisions accumulated over time, building walls neither of them had intentionally constructed. Sighs heavily. When they arrived home, Jason made a choice that terrified him, nervous. Instead of trying to convince Emily that everything would be fine, he asked her the question he should have asked years ago: what did you always want to do with your life? If you could start over tomorrow, what would Emily choose? Her answer came slowly, but it was honest, and it opened a door between them that had been sealed shut for far too long. What the reader learns. Jason discovers that love without communication breeds resentment and emotional distance. His mistake was assuming that because he was satisfied their marriage was balanced, when in reality Emily was quietly suffering. We learn that ignoring a partner's unhappiness under the guise of maintaining peace actually creates deeper damage. Jason also realizes that in his contentment he inadvertently became selfish by not actively checking in on Emily's dreams and aspirations. The harsh truth is that couples can love each other deeply while simultaneously failing each other by not creating safe spaces for honest conversation about personal sacrifices and unfulfilled desires. Emily sat across from Jason at their kitchen table the morning after the reunion, and something had shifted between them overnight. Nervous. She had slept fitfully, tossing and turning while memories flooded her mind. When she finally woke at dawn, Jason was already awake, staring at nothing with red-rimmed eyes and an expression of raw vulnerability she rarely witnessed. He had been thinking all night about her question and what her answer might mean for them. Pauses. For the next week, they fell into a pattern that felt both healing and dangerous. Emily began texting with Sarah more frequently, and Sarah invited her to meet for coffee before heading to her studio. Jason encouraged it, excited, telling Emily that she should reconnect with her old friend and pursue whatever interested her. But something was shifting in Emily that Jason did not fully understand at first. She seemed lighter, somehow less burdened, but also more distant from him in an unexpected way. Emily started attending painting classes on Wednesday evenings, and Jason stayed home. She began researching documentary film programs online at night. She laughed more, but her laughter no longer included him the way it used to. Giggle. Jason told himself he was being supportive, but underneath the surface a different emotion was growing, like a vine wrapping around his heart and strangling it slowly. It was jealousy and fear, frustrated, and a creeping sense that by supporting her dreams he was losing her to them. 3 weeks after the reunion, Emily mentioned casually that Sarah had suggested she apply for a fellowship program that would take her to travel and work on a documentary project for 6 months. It would begin in 4 months, gasping. Jason felt his entire world tilt. He had said she should pursue her dreams, but this was beyond what he had anticipated. 6 months away from him, from their home, from their marriage. Voice trembling. "You would really leave for that long?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Emily looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his stomach drop. She was excited, genuinely excited about the possibility, and he realized with horror that he had encouraged her back to life so effectively that she might leave him behind in the process. That night they argued for the first time in their marriage in a real way, shouting. Jason accused her of using the reunion as an excuse to escape their life, and Emily fired back, saying that he was being selfish by wanting her to stay small and unfulfilled just to make him feel secure. Hysterical laugh from his own desperation. She said things she could not take back. He said things he immediately regretted. Both of them spoke from places of fear and pain and anger. "I gave up everything for you," Emily screamed, voice trembling, "and I meant it when I said I loved you, but I also meant it when I said I lost myself. Now that I'm finally finding myself again, you want to cage me again. Is that what love is supposed to be?" Jason stood there feeling completely helpless, tired, and broken. He realized that by encouraging her independence, he had inadvertently opened a door he could not close. More terrifying was the possibility that Emily might walk through it and never look back. He began to question whether real love sometimes meant letting someone go even when it meant losing them forever. Pauses heavily. Over the next few days, Emily filled out the fellowship application with determined focus, excited. Jason watched from the periphery, feeling like a ghost in his own marriage. He wanted to support her, but he also wanted to beg her to stay. The conflict inside him was tearing him apart, and he began to understand that Emily's pain had been spreading to him all along. Her regret had become his nightmare. Sarah called frequently, and Jason noticed Emily talking in hushed tones, whispering, that made him feel excluded. He imagined his wife living in another country for 6 months surrounded by passionate creative people while he remained here maintaining the comfortable life she had grown to resent. Sighs. The fear was irrational, but it was consuming him entirely. He was losing her, and he did not know how to hold on without smothering her. What the reader learns. This part reveals the dangerous middle ground in relationships where good intentions can create unintended consequences. Jason learns that supporting a partner does not mean unconditional acceptance of all choices, and sometimes true love requires honest conversation about boundaries and fears. Emily learns that newfound freedom can become its own form of selfishness if pursued without considering the impact on the person who loved you through your darkness. We discover that rekindling passion and individual identity within a marriage is complex and requires both partners to grow together, not apart. The mistake here is that neither Jason nor Emily communicated their deeper fears during this crucial transition period. Jason feared abandonment while Emily feared being recaptured. Both were so afraid of repeating old patterns that they created new destructive ones. We learn that supporting someone does not mean disappearing from the equation, and that both partners must find ways to honor individual dreams while protecting the relationship itself. The acceptance letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, and Emily came home holding it like it was made of glass, nervous, voice trembling. Jason was sitting on the couch when she walked in, and he knew immediately what had happened from the expression on her face. She had been accepted to the fellowship program, and she was leaving in 6 weeks, gasping. She stood in the doorway waiting for his reaction, and the silence between them felt like a canyon that could never be crossed. Pauses. "Congratulations," he said finally, and his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. Emily flinched at his tone, and tears began rolling down her cheeks, crying. She had expected anger or sadness or desperation, but what she heard instead was resignation, and that somehow felt worse. It meant he had already given up on them. That night Jason packed an overnight bag and told Emily he was going to stay at his brother Matthew's place for a few days. He needed space to think, and Emily did not argue, frustrated. She simply watched him leave with tears streaming down her face and her hand pressed against her mouth, whispering his name as the door closed behind him. Jason drove through the rain feeling numb and lost. At Matthew's apartment Jason broke down completely, hysterical laugh mixed with crying. He told his brother everything about the reunion, about Emily's confession, about the fellowship, and about the slow dissolution of their marriage. Matthew listened without judgment and then asked Jason a question that changed everything. Pauses. "Do you want to be right, or do you want to be together?" his brother asked quietly. Because right now you're trying to be both, and that's impossible. If you love her, you have to let her go completely, or you have to meet her halfway. But standing in the middle watching her leave will destroy you both. Jason sat with those words for hours. He thought about his marriage and all the ways he had failed Emily without realizing it. He thought about how he had built a comfortable life without ever asking if it was the life she wanted too. He thought about how he had made decisions based on his needs and his fears without considering hers. Sighs heavily. The selfishness that he had not recognized in himself suddenly became glaringly obvious. He returned home 3 days later with a proposal that terrified him, nervous, voice trembling. Emily was in the kitchen making tea, and she looked exhausted, like she had barely slept. Jason asked her to sit down, and then he told her what he had realized. "I love you, but I was loving a version of you that did not actually exist," he began. "I was loving the woman I wanted you to be instead of seeing the woman you actually are. And that was selfish, and it was wrong, and I am sorry." Pauses. He told her that he did not want her to choose between him and the fellowship. Instead he asked if they could try something different. "What if we both changed?" he continued, excited, voice trembling. "What if I took a leave of absence and came with you for the 6 months? Yes, I would be learning alongside you instead of traveling for work, but what if we experienced something new together instead of losing each other in the process? What if we grew together instead of apart?" Emily stared at him, gasping, in shock, unable to speak for a long moment. Then she began, stammers, to say that she could not ask him to do that. She had felt so guilty about wanting to leave that the idea of him joining her seemed impossible. But Jason was resolved, excited. He said that this was not a sacrifice. This was a choice. This was him finally seeing what she needed and deciding to prioritize her and them over convenience and comfort. They talked all night about what this would mean practically and emotionally. It would be difficult to arrange, but not impossible. Jason could potentially transition to remote work or take a sabbatical, laughs, with cautious hope. Emily could pursue her passion without guilt. They could rediscover each other in a place where neither of them had history or expectations or comfortable routines. Big laugh of relief. By morning they were both excited and nervous about the prospect. It was not a perfect solution, but it was a solution built on communication and compromise and genuine effort. For the first time in weeks, Jason felt like they were on the same team again. He held Emily close, and she held him back with the kind of urgency that comes from knowing how close you came to losing something precious. Pauses. What the reader learns. Jason finally understands that real love sometimes requires radical vulnerability and willingness to change your own life rather than expecting your partner to fit into it. His selfishness came not from malice but from unconsciousness, and once he became aware of it, he chose differently. Emily learns that her regret did not have to destroy her marriage if both people were willing to work for something better. The lesson here is that relationships do not fail because of one person's dreams, but because both people stop communicating and compromising. Jason and Emily discover that love is not about staying the same together but about growing and changing while holding hands through the transformation. We learn that admitting fault takes courage and that pride often masquerades as protection when really it is just fear. 6 months later, Jason and Emily returned to the city where they had lived while working on the documentary project. It had been transformative in ways they could not have predicted. Excited. They had traveled to 3 different countries. Emily had directed segments of a documentary that would be featured at major film festivals. Big laugh. Jason had discovered a passion for photography that he had buried years ago. They had made love in different beds in different cities and had conversations that went into the early morning hours about life and art and dreams. Laughs wickedly. When they received the invitation to the 1-year alumni reunion, Jason and Emily exchanged looks that conveyed everything without words. Pauses. This time they were different people. Not different in the sense that they no longer recognized each other, but different in the sense that they had both become more fully themselves while remaining deeply intertwined, voice trembling. Walking into the ballroom felt like entering a different world, nervous. The same decorations were up, but everything looked different to them now. Sarah was there and she embraced Emily with genuine warmth, excited, commenting on the light in her eyes and asking about the documentary. Emily told her about the film festivals and the interest from streaming platforms, and Sarah squeezed her hand knowingly. As the evening progressed, people asked them what they had been doing for the past year. Jason and Emily told their story together, literally finishing each other's sentences. They talked about taking the risk. They talked about the fear and the uncertainty and the moments when it felt impossible, voice trembling. They talked about discovering that sometimes love means jumping into the unknown with someone rather than asking them to stay still. When Emily excused herself to speak with some former classmates, Jason found himself in conversation with Marcus, who mentioned he was thinking about leaving his startup to spend time on personal projects. Marcus asked Jason how he had the courage to make such a radical change. Pauses, and Jason found himself giving advice he never thought he would give. You have to ask yourself if your comfortable life is actually making you happy or just numb, he told Marcus. And then you have to ask the people you love what they need and actually listen to the answer. We spent years thinking we had communication, but we were just performing a life neither of us really wanted. Later that evening, Emily found Jason on the terrace overlooking the same city lights where their entire journey toward honesty had begun. Pauses. She took his hand and rested her head on his shoulder. Neither of them said anything for a long time because words felt insufficient. I still regret marrying so young, she finally said, quietly. But I do not regret that it was you. Does that make sense? Voice trembling. Jason understood completely. Sighs. He did not regret staying in their marriage through the difficult parts. He did not regret the risk he took to keep it. But he also did not regret the years of comfort they had shared, even if that comfort had eventually become a cage for both of them. Pauses. We were just learning to be ourselves together, Emily continued, excited. Laughs. We had to go through the regret and the anger and the fear to get here. And now I get to be Emily the filmmaker and Emily who loves Jason. Not one or the other. As they returned to the reunion together, they noticed couples watching them with curiosity and longing, as if they could sense something profound had shifted in their relationship, shouting with joy internally. Jason and Emily had not saved their marriage by ignoring the problems. They had saved it by facing the darkest truths and choosing each other anyway. Big laugh, with eyes wide open and hearts fully engaged. Later, when people asked them the secret to their happiness, Jason and Emily both laughed, laughs wickedly, because there was no secret. There was only the willingness to admit that something was broken. There was the courage to hear painful truths from the person you loved most. There was the decision to change not just words but actions and choices and priorities. There was the recognition that love is not passive but active and intentional and requires showing up even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Pauses. As the year progressed, Emily would receive calls about her documentary from festival directors and producers. Jason would develop his photography into a side business that brought him genuine fulfillment. Excited. But more importantly, they would check in with each other regularly. Pauses. Asking not how are you but how are we and what do you need from me right now, and am I showing up for your dreams the way you need me to? The hardest thing they learned was that love without growth becomes stagnant, and that partners who do not actively invest in each other slowly become strangers living in the same house. They learned that selfishness is not always loud and obvious. It hides in good intentions and comfortable routines, and the assumption that love means never having to say hard things. Voice trembling. They learned that real courage in a relationship is not about grand gestures but about daily choices to communicate, to listen, to adapt, and to prioritize not just the relationship but the person you love becoming their fullest self. Pauses heavily. Emily had admitted her regret at the reunion with fear that it would destroy them, crying. Instead, that admission became the foundation for a marriage rebuilt on honesty rather than comfort, on intentionality rather than habit, on love that was chosen every single day rather than simply assumed. Big laugh. They understood now that the reunion had not been an ending but a beginning. Excited. It was the moment they stopped performing their marriage and started actually building it. What the reader learns. The final lesson is that relationships require constant attention and evolution. Both Jason and Emily learn that sacrifice without communication breeds resentment and that support without boundaries leads to loss of self. They discover that true partnership means being willing to radically change your own life for someone you love while also honoring your own needs and dreams. The couple learns that regret can be a catalyst for positive change if both people are willing to face it honestly. We realize that selfishness often masquerades as selflessness and that the most destructive force in relationships is not conflict but avoidance of conflict. Jason and Emily teach us that the people who regret their choices are often trying to tell us something important, and we can either dismiss them or listen deeply and let their truth change us. The story ultimately shows that marriage is not about staying the same together but about growing and changing while maintaining connection. It teaches that love is not a destination but a practice, a daily choice to show up fully, to communicate honestly, and to support not the person you imagined but the person who is actually standing in front of you, becoming their truest self. The biggest lesson is that comfort is the enemy of growth and passion, and the most dangerous thing that can happen to a marriage is when both people become too comfortable to remember why they chose each other in the first place.